Welcome back everyone, it's me Matt and thank you so much for joining me on today's video. Before we deep dive into wheeled utility vehicles today, let me know what your favourite military wheeled vehicle is. Mine, of course, is the Land Rover Defender. Sadly, I had to sell my Land Rover Defender Wolf that I owned a couple of years ago. I needed the money, but I miss that thing so very much. It's one of the most fun vehicles that I'd driven in the British Army and was able to get on deal from GC Surplus here in Canada, kind of a leftover wheeled utility vehicle, and I do miss her dearly. One day maybe I'll get her back. But today we are looking at light utility vehicles in the grand scheme of things in the military sector, and it's a fascinating influx of new designs and just general requirements in military being told to capitalize on and use these kind of vehicles. But why are we talking about this? Well, to me, it's a phenomenon that I'm finding to be kind of interesting for the fact that I don't think a lot of troops are enjoying utilizing these particular kinds of military platforms, and there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, let's take a look at what I'm actually talking about. So we're looking today at the GM Defense Infantry Squad Vehicle ISV, which is basically the light utility vehicle for the United States since 2021, which is slowly and progressively removing the Humvees from service. And there's a host of these type of vehicles being strewn across the military sector and the defense sector, trying to sell these things like hotcakes. And let's be honest, they're selling very well. The original contract with General Motors for these vehicles was $214 million US. That's 1,000 of these trucks, and countries around the world are following the same boat and capitalizing on them too, including here in Canada. Now, I cannot speak too much, in my opinion, on the Canadian military version of this platform because I am bound by my social media and public affairs influence on my YouTube page, so sadly I can't speak much to it. However, the US military one I can, and other military vehicles that are out there exist in the platform of this configuration too. There is a plethora of light utility vehicles in a 4x4 configuration that are being used, and we have to be careful about the definition of what a light utility vehicle in the military of today is. I think a lot of people believe it to be kind of like a Humvee, and yes, in some regards. In the old days it was this, but the definition of light utility vehicle I think has significantly changed. You know, nowadays we have a very strong push towards pickup trucks, basically being turned into a light military vehicle. And it's not quite fair to say that it is a light utility vehicle. In my opinion, it would be an ultra-light utility vehicle, kind of like an ATV. I would say even lighter than a normal standard pickup that we would have on the roads as a civilian market, because most of the hardware and the, paneling has been removed, so they are, in theory, lighter than a civilian pickup truck. And I do like enjoying utility vehicles. I've played around with the Land Rover Defender in a WMIX setup in Afghanistan. I've worked with the Jackal, which I would say is truly a light utility vehicle. But these ones that are being sold today are really phasing onto the ultralight, because at the end of the day, they have zero armor, and they're basically everything taken off them. They're just left with a chassis or a cage, and some seats are even added to the back of it, but the theory is it's a chassis with an engine, some wheels, and a cage. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably saying, well, that's a great idea, Matt. It's good for reconnaissance and special forces and getting in and out of tight spots and super adaptable and modular. But the reality is it's not quite the case. I've been talking to a number of people who utilize these vehicles, both in the United States, in the UK, and obviously even here in Canada that has recently been announced. And they've been using these vehicles firsthand, and I have to unfortunately inform you that the people that are using them are not enjoying these platforms. And why is that? Well, again, we have to look at that definition of a light utility vehicle. Some vehicles, of course, make a lot of sense in this kind of configuration. For instance, garrison driving vehicles. And what do I mean by that? Well, a garrison driving vehicle are basically, cars, trucks, pickups that are basically doing general duties around bases or encampments, forward operating bases, for example, that just need to get troops in and out of environments that are not contested in a combat environment and just easy to move troops around. They're cheap, they're agile, and you don't have to worry too much about maintenance or them actually going into combat. But of course, they could, if necessary, be sent into a very light contact, but for the most part, not in a prolonged engagement or full-blown combat. They're very cheap to buy, and they're kind of the do-it-all vehicle. If you need to get someone to the mess hall or you need to go shuttle some water to another part of the base, it's all there. That's what we utilize in Canada, known as the Milcot. It's basically a Chevrolet Silverado that has a couple of upgrades. For the most part, it can go off-road, but is there just as an administration vehicle. It is not actually going outside the wire into a contact environment, and if it does, it hasn't really the prolonged engagement capabilities to do so. And this is where we're starting to get into the complicated realm of should we or shouldn't we send these vehicles into combat, and there's a lot of risk here. These vehicles are being sold primarily to infantry units. I mean, given the configuration of reconnaissance, able to get in and out of tight spots quickly, and yes, pickup trucks with barely any equipment or armor on them, and even panels are very light and can move very quickly. But think of the things that you are sacrificing. Protection is, of course, the biggest one, and not just protection from small arms fire or artillery shrapnel, but from the environment. And I found a very interesting interview from a military member that, unfortunately, due to my public affairs and policy requirements in the Canadian Armed Forces, I cannot talk about where or who this interview was with, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it very quickly, that basically said, when challenged upon the question, what happens when troops are getting covered in freezing snow in these open concept vehicles, where it's raining, etc., etc., and the response was quite interesting. The commander, or the advocate for the vehicles, basically said, well, you know what, if they're going to get wet and cold and miserable, they might as well get to their location and dismount from the vehicle already that way, and they'll stay nice and cold throughout their engagement. They basically said that coming from a nice, warm, enclosed, protected, armoured vehicle and going into the cold environment is going to be worse than just travelling the whole way and getting used to it. If you were to tell a troop commander or a section commander to their face that that's about to come into their environment, they're not going to be very happy. And this is what a lot of troops are saying. Yes, they have a lot of utilitarian capability and can get in and out of the vehicle quickly if they need to dismount. They can put their equipment on there very, very quickly. And there's lots of logistics you can put within these vehicles that make sense. It's an easy platform to work with. It's easier to cam up, quite quick and easy to travel and drive long distances. Of course, fuel economy, when we reduce all that armor packaging on there, gets it very quickly into an environment where they need to use them. And then, of course, it's air portable, but you sacrifice so much capability within the vehicle when you remove all this sort of substructure and infrastructure to support the crew inside. Now, some of these vehicles are poised to hold up to 9 troops. That's a lot of troops within one vehicle, one little vehicle. So again, you're adding a lot of capacity to delivering the troops logistically, but keeping them comfortable and set up ready for war on the battle that they're going into is not happening with this setup. And yes, I'm going to have a bit of a artillery guy moment here complaining about the heat and the cold, but it's true. You have to remember these vehicles are completely exposed. The elements in desert warm environments, yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. Even tropical environments, not too bad. You're warm. But once it starts raining and you're traveling in these things that are meant to travel at close to 80 to 100 kilometers an hour, you are going to be absolutely drenched. Even off-road, you're going to do around 40 to 60 kilometers an hour. And if it's raining, every single inch of your body, no matter how much waterproofing you have on, will get wet. I've been in armored fighting vehicles, tracked vehicles, and encompassed and surrounded by armor and paneling and nice, warm, cozy spots, and no matter what, you're still absolutely drenched. And there's nothing worse than getting to the environment you're about to fight in, even if it was quickly, and all lightweight and ready to go with all your equipment being soaking wet and cold. And the theory of, well, you're going to be cold and wet anyway, so just get used to it. That's not going to fly. Troops want to be able to come back to their vehicle at the end of the contact, the engagement, the reconnaissance, and warm their stuff up again. You're not going to be comforted coming off your patrol thinking, I got to get back to my vehicle and we'll patrol out of here and drive back out and I can at least, get my boots warmed up, etc. It just makes no sense. And the fact that they're saying, well, you'll just get comfortable and uncomfortable using just a vehicle that's always uncomfortable, I call bullshit. I'm sorry, but I'm talking to troops that are telling me this, and they despise the fact that they're trying to be sold on this lightweight role for going into full combat. And I'm sure many of you are saying, well, Matt, if they're dismounted, they're going to have to walk hundreds of kilometers further than this vehicle getting them there. And I agree. I'm not against what you're saying. But then why have the vehicle travel 100 kilometers up to the position, whereas the last 10 kilometers the most tactical, most advantageous to be sneaky and light, but for the other 90 kilometers you're going to be soaking wet and cold and miserable. I mean, they don't even plumb from the engine compartment or the cooling systems or the heating systems the vents for you to warm up, because there'd be no point, it just goes to atmosphere. But at least with a vehicle that has some paneling or protective covering, you can get some basic heat out of there. And you're obviously going to be cold and wet no matter where you go, but if you have a vehicle to return to after your engagement, it makes morale so much better. You get to dry off, get protected from the elements, and there's nothing worse than going on a 2-hour wrecking patrol, coming back and saying, well, I guess we're just going to get more wet and gross as we deploy to the next area. I just don't get it. And look, there is a very fine compromise between huge amounts of armor, a lot of extra armor, paneling, etc., and the extra weight to a light utility vehicle. I mean, the Americans have done quite well, I think, in utilizing the Humvee. I wouldn't say it's quite light. It's almost medium utility for the most part. It's somewhat of a garrison hopper as well, but it could be beefed up if necessary. And when you have more heavy-duty vehicles that get into heavy armor and heavy paneling, you do add a lot of cost, I agree, and you do add a lot of complication in maintenance, etc., and you can't get in and out of these things very quickly, and yes, there are certainly some discredit to those who are using them in a light role. Dismounts, though, are never going to take these vehicles into combat anyway, so why would you worry too much about having to be in and out and quickly moving from the vehicle? I mean, yes, you can mount a HMG on top or a 50 cal on top, but just go with a defendable platform that has armor. Can you imagine traveling 40 to 60 kilometers an hour trying to utilize a pump-action shotgun to knock out drones? That's another thing that they've been trying to utilize on these platforms as well. If you have an open concept, an open architecture platform where you can see out and there's only the caging, you'll be able to have more situational awareness and see things further. And if drones are coming, maybe you could shoot it down. Can you imagine traveling at 40 to 60 kilometers an hour off-road, bouncing around, trying to use a clay pigeon shotgun or one of those RF frequency guns that they're firing to take down drones, bouncing all over the place, trying to aim? It makes no sense. I mean, a drone is no bigger than the size of a small cat. So if you're trying to shoot something out the sky traveling at that speed in the back of one of these things, it just doesn't add up. You're not going to be able to do that. It's just more and more deadly for drones to take you out. And I know a lot of you are probably debating saying, well, Matt, it doesn't really matter which vehicle you're going to go into because drones can take all of them out. And I agree. So then let's not try and poise this on the basis of you're more able to detect and engage drones as they come after you. No, you're not. Any vehicle, whether you're fully up-armored or no armor at all, isn't going to protect you against drones. Unfortunately, that's a whole different plethora of conversation to be had. And having a light utility vehicle with a ton of extra armor on there at least gives you some benefits of those packages like small arms fire and shrapnel from artillery that this wouldn't. Okay, if you do get some airburst in the sky, this vehicle, you're done. It doesn't matter how fast you're going, shrapnel will take you out. Unfortunately, it travels a lot faster than the maximum speed limits of these things do off-road. But I have to admit, they do have their advantages. For reconnaissance and special forces in small configurations of missions, they do make sense. They're very, very quick. They're agile. You can throw them on the back of a plane or a helicopter and they'll be in there. But you put these guys in prolonged engagements, they cannot withstand it. The crews inside them are just going to hate their lives. They do have some other advantages, though. You'll be able to put your equipment on and off there quite quickly, dismount very quickly, and you're able to set up a machine gun wherever you want all over this thing without a huge amount of infrastructural change or needing mechanics to do so, to put a different panel on or a different mount. You can put them all over the place. It's really utilitarian and very useful for that. But these things also have zero protection from IEDs or mine blasts, and I know many of you are saying, well, yeah, Matt, a lot of wheeled vehicles certainly don't have as much resistance to IED or mine blast attacks, but in this setup, like the WMIC we had in Afghanistan and even in Iraq, which God bless the troops that unfortunately lost their lives on those things, which was an embarrassment to even send them out there, there is nothing to protect you. At least in some of the wheeled configurations of light utilities out there, they have V-shaped hulls, they have IED or mine blast resistant seating that absorbs the shock so your spine isn't turned into a freaking concertina, and there's nothing to protect you in these things. They're just a chassis, it's just a pickup truck. And a lot of you are saying, well, Matt, the Toyotas out there, the Hiluxes, they're so good, they're light utility vehicles, they're pickup trucks. Yes, I totally agree, but not at the cost of what some of these things are being sold as. So let's not try and pretend that we're, falling into the market of, military industrial complex trying to sell these things off. Then just buy Toyota Hiluxes. Let's keep it simple, right? Buy a very cheap Toyota Hilux. Stop trying to sell it off as this, quote, light utility vehicle with all these extra features. It's just not the case. And, ATVs are a big deal right now. ATVs, UTVs, the Royal Canadian Regiment has also been trialing a lot of them, and I think they make sense. Short range engagements, very quick reconnaissance, pull them back to the company, mount them onto the trucks again, but not for long range engagements, not for something that needs, traveling hundreds of Ks. It really doesn't make sense, and ATVs are not meant to be used in prolonged big engagements or battles. They're there purely for reconnaissance, and these vehicles that they're being sold as in these pickup truck variants are kind of being set as like platoons of infantry or sections of infantry that can drive out, bring all their gear, dismount and fight. Great. On paper that makes complete sense, but it shouldn't be the standard. You need to bring armor back to some of these vehicles, and there's so many options out there. And I really wouldn't want the crew to be inside of these things if you're getting engaged, right? Small arms fire hitting you, nothing to protect you. I mean, you are dismounting. At that point, your vehicle's going to get knocked out anyway. There's no protection to the wheels. There's no self-inflating tire systems on the majority of them. Your engine compartment will get taken out. And then you're left with just a chassis. There's nothing there for you. And artillery, the king of battle, being that I am an artillery gunner, these things are going to be completely exposed to things like proximity rounds or even HE around there. And even when you look at it, the potential for chemical environments, right? If you're going to use these as a reconnaissance setting, Special Forces may need to go in contested CBRN environments. Absolutely no protection whatsoever. And I can't imagine driving these things in the rain with a respirator on, trying to focus on going off-road in a contested CBRN environment. Makes no sense. And they are supposed to be harder to get stuck in the mud. I have to disagree. Any vehicle that weighs over about 3.5 tons, which most of these things will do, will get stuck in the mud, no matter how thick the mud is or not it is, and how good you think your vehicle is, you're going to get stuck at some point. And anything up to about 9 troops on there, you could probably do with even just pushing it out, which is fine, but then why don't you just up-armor the vehicle anyway? Because all it takes is for a big, heavy-duty winch to pull you out. It doesn't take much. Put a big old winch on the front of there and pull it out. I've worked with vehicles up to about 9 tons in a wheel configuration, like the Panther of the British Army. That's an A vehicle, which can actually be ground-guided around camp. They classified it as a tank, basically, because you could barely see where you're going around in camps. But that thing would get stuck quite often. Very big, thick, flat wheelbase, chunky, used as a command element, but it would get stuck often. But that winch would get you out of that environment pretty easily. But these vehicles, are being poised to, well, they're easy to self-recover. Yeah, well, so are up-armored vehicles too. It's not rocket science. For instance, the Oshkosh JLTV, a fantastic vehicle, I would say is more of a medium utility vehicle than light, is an absolute beast. And I really do love the JLTV, and I'd love to be able to try it out myself, but that's what I would designate as a light utility vehicle. And then the smaller vehicles beneath that, like the ones we're seeing across the pond right now, with the Jackal and things like that, they're also a light utility vehicle. But things like the platforms coming out with GM Defense are not, in my opinion, light. They're ultra light or almost very light tactical vehicles. I don't know, guys. I'd love to hear your opinion on this, and I know I'm getting a little worked up about it, but it's just really hard for me to hear people on the front or training with these vehicles saying, Matt, these things are awful, and we're trying to be showcased of these things being incredible, but they're just not. And I think in the reality of things, we're trying to skimp out and cheap out on things that get troops deployed quickly and can be purchased quickly, but at the end of the day, the troops I spoke to despise these particular platforms in this, quote, light utility role. They don't enjoy them, and they prefer having the ability to warm up, be less exposed to the elements and shrapnel and small arms fire, and still have just about the same sorts of capabilities a heavier duty vehicle would have. Does make sense to me, but I want to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of the modern light utility vehicles of today. If you've ever driven one or utilized them yourselves, maybe you love them, maybe you think they're great. Let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your opinion. And of course, for those who've been financially contributing to my channel, thank you so much. It really does mean a lot to me. And I hope to see you in the next video. All the best, folks. Bye-bye.